Good morning. Welcome to a special Christmas edition of Refill Randy. Grab your favorite cup, fill it up, and let's start this Christmas morning right together. Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! I hope that everyone is having a fantastic Christmas morning. It's 7 o'clock, so hopefully you've at least opened your stockings by now or allowed your kids to, and that you're going to have a good day. As I think about Christmas, I think back to my childhood. I already shared one of my memories a couple weeks ago about when I really wanted that harmonica for a gift. But a few years ago, I was on the phone with my brother Roger, and it was shortly before he passed away, and he broke my childhood. And what I mean by that is I was telling him that I remembered when I was just a very young boy. At that time, I still roomed with my sister, and I remember one Christmas Eve that Roger came in through the window in our room dressed up as Santa Claus, and I just remember fondly the effort that he took to just make that such a special Christmas for us. And every year I think about that, and I always appreciated that. And so I told Roger that. I said, I just want you to know how much I really did love that you did that for me. And then I heard cackling on the other end of the phone. And he said, oh, I remember that Christmas. I got back from a party, and I think he'd been drinking. And Fuzz, as he calls my dad, had locked me out. And so I had to sneak in your window. Some things are better left unknown, right? I share that because, as I thought back, I had just the best memory of that. But it really wasn't what I thought it was. Now, if you look around today, you'll see all these beautiful, manger scenes. Everything is pristine. It's beautiful. Jesus is glowing. It wasn't like that the first Christmas either. We've already talked some about how they didn't even recognize who he was because he didn't look like what they were expecting. And there was nothing attractive about him in that sense. But this Christmas morning, what I want to leave you with, I want you to understand exactly what God did when he sent Jesus Christ here. In the book of John, chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that had been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of a human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. In case you didn't quite understand what that passage was telling us, it's that Jesus, who was the Word referred to there, he was God. He's always been God. He will always be God. And yet, for 33 years, he chose to be contained in this finite human body. It's kind of like the movie Aladdin. All the powers of the cosmos, itty bitty living space. He chose to do that for us. He chose to do that because he was going to live a holy life. He was going to die a sinner's death. He was going to rise again 3 days later, taking that sting out of death, as we've talked about before, all for us, because we couldn't do it on our own. That's what Christmas is about. It was also so that he could relate to us. You know, Jesus, he's felt everything that we feel. He knows what it is to be lonely. He knows what it is to be sad and to lose someone. He knows what it is to celebrate. He knows what it is to go through pain. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. He even knows what it is to be tempted, even though he never gave in. And he did all that, and he lived all that life for us, so that he could relate to us, and more importantly, so we could relate to him. Because all this was for was leading us back to the Father, back to where we needed to be. You know, so we all once again had access to his dad and to eternal life. One of the best stories I've ever come across to relay this message, it was written by the late, great Paul Harvey. When I was growing up, there was always Paul Harvey stories on the radio, and of course he would always end each one with, "And that's the rest of the story." Well, as we consider Christmas morning, let me share the rest of the story. It's called The Christmas Storm. This is about a modern man, one of us. He was not a Scrooge. He was a kind, decent, mostly good man, generous to his family, upright in his dealings with others. But he did not believe in all that incarnation stuff that the churches proclaimed at Christmas time. It just didn't make sense to him, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He just could not swallow the Jesus story about God coming to earth as a man. "I'm truly sorry to distress you," he told his wife, "but I'm not going to church with you this Christmas Eve." He said he'd feel like a hypocrite, that he would much rather stay home, but that he would wait up for them, so he stayed. They went. Shortly after the family drove away in the car, snow began to fall. He went to the window to watch the flurries getting heavier and heavier. Then he went back to his fireside window, and again he began to read the newspaper. Minutes later, he was startled by a thudding sound, and then another, and then another. And at first he thought someone was throwing snowballs against his living room window. Well, when he went to the front door, he found a flock of birds huddled, miserable in the snow. They had been caught up in the storm, and in a desperate search for shelter, they had tried to fly through his large landscape window. Well, he couldn't let the poor creatures lie there and freeze. He remembered the barn where his children stabled their pony. That would provide a warm shelter if he could direct the birds to it. He quickly put on his coat and galoshes, trampled through the deepening snow to the barn, opened the door wide, and turned on a light. But the birds did not come in. He figured food would entice them in, and so he hurried back to the house, fetched breadcrumbs, sprinkled them onto the snow, making a trail to the yellow-lighted, wide-open doorway of the stable. But, to his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs and continued to flap around helplessly in the snow. He tried catching them. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around, waving his arms. Instead, they scattered in every direction except into that warm, lighted barn. Then he realized they were afraid of him. To them he reasoned, I'm a strange and terrifying creature. If only I could think of some way to let them know that they can trust me, that I'm not trying to hurt them, but to help them. How? Any move he made tended to frighten them, confuse them. They just would not follow. They would not be led or shooed because they feared him. If only I could become a bird myself, he thought. If only I could be a bird and mingle with them and speak their language and tell them not to be afraid and show them the way to the safe, warm barn. But I'd have to be one of them so that they could see and hear and understand. And at that moment, the church bells began to ring. The sound reached his ears above the sound of the wind. He stood there listening to the bells. Adieris Fidelis. Listening to the bells pealing the glad tidings of Christmas, and he sank to his knees in the snow. Friends, I hope that you realize how big Christmas really is. Yes, it is the birth of Jesus Christ, but it's also the catalyst for what God had determined to do ever since we were kicked out of the garden. He wanted to bring us back. He wanted to be in relationship and in fellowship with us. He wanted to have his children come home. And so he sent his son, Jesus. That's how much he loves you. That's the best gift you're ever going to get this Christmas. And so remember that, because that's the rest of the story. Have a great day and a Merry Christmas.